You probably think mud is the last thing you'd ever drink. Thick, brown, buzzing with insects, full of smells you can't describe without gagging. But to the Native Americans who lived across the harshest terrains of North America, mud wasn't just dirt. It was a teacher. And from that teacher, they learned the art of survival. How to pull clean, drinkable water out of places where no sane person would even look. Here's the thing about the American wilderness. It doesn't care if you're thirsty. The Great Plains can look endless, but hide their water deep beneath cracked soil. The deserts of the Southwest can bake you alive while a storm brews just beyond the horizon. Even in the forests, clean water isn't guaranteed. A sparkling pool could be a bacterial nightmare, and a muddy puddle might save your life, if you knew how to handle it. The tribes who lived here did. They didn't need laboratories or microscopes. They had observation, patience, and generations of hard-earned knowledge. Over centuries, they developed dozens of techniques to locate, collect, and purify water, using nothing but what the land provided. Some of those methods were simple, some were genius. Together, they formed one of the most effective survival systems the world has ever seen. To most modern people, water is a convenience. You twist a faucet, and it appears. But for Native Americans, it was the single most valuable element of life. Water wasn't just a resource, it was alive. It had spirit, memory, and will. To misuse it wasn't just foolish. It was disrespectful. That mindset shaped everything. Camps were placed near clean springs, but never right on top of them. Waste and washing happened downstream. Children were taught early that you don't waste water, you earn it. And when drought came, you didn't panic. You turned to the wisdom that had kept your ancestors alive. Let's start with the dirtiest trick in the book, literally. When rains turned plains and canyons into brown swamps, water seemed everywhere, yet nowhere safe to drink. Straight mud would make you sick, but if you understood it, it could save you. When tribes came across a muddy pond or stream, they didn't scoop and drink. They scooped and waited. They built shallow pits in the ground, lined with clay, leaves, or woven grass, and poured the muddy water in. Then they walked away. Hours later, they returned to find the mud sitting quietly at the bottom, while clearer water hovered above. All it took was stillness. Sediment settles. Heavier particles sink first. The cleaner water rises to the top. It's one of nature's oldest purification tricks, and they mastered it long before anyone called it sedimentation. The key was patience. You couldn't rush it. If you disturbed it too soon, everything mixed back up, and you were drinking dirt soup again. For stubborn water, tribes added natural coagulants. Desert peoples used crushed mesquite beans or cactus sap to bind tiny clay particles together so they sank faster. Forest dwellers stirred in bark dust or powdered roots that did the same job. What looked like witchcraft was early chemistry. Some tribes even dug their settling pits right next to rivers so that water seeped naturally through sand before filling the hole. That way, they started with water that was already half-filtered. It looked like simple mud, but it was a slow, steady chemistry experiment happening right under their feet. Once the heavy stuff had sunk, it was time for step 2, filtration. This is where things get impressive. Native engineers built filters out of the same ingredients they walked on. Picture a hollowed log, a large pottery jar, or a woven basket lined with fibers. They'd fill it in layers, big stones at the bottom, then gravel, then coarse sand, then fine sand, and finally, a top layer of charcoal crushed from last night's fire. Water poured through this earthy sandwich and came out the bottom clear as glass. Every layer had a purpose. Stones slowed the flow. Sand caught smaller grains. Charcoal absorbed odors, bad tastes, and invisible toxins. By the time the water dripped out, it was drinkable. Many tribes noticed something interesting. Water stored in freshly burned clay pots stayed fresher longer. It didn't smell as bad. It didn't grow the slimy film that ruined other containers. That blackened layer inside the pot wasn't a flaw. It was a miracle. The heat created a thin film of carbon, basically natural charcoal, on the inner surface. It stopped bacteria from clinging to the walls and filtered tiny impurities. They didn't know it at the time, but they'd stumbled onto the same science pirates would later use when they charred their barrels at sea. Fire turned ordinary clay into a filter. Water stored in charred vessels stayed safe longer, especially when sealed with animal hides or plant resin to keep insects and dust out. Some tribes even took the idea further. They'd toss small chunks of charcoal directly into their water pots. It sounds strange, until you realize that modern activated carbon filters do the exact same thing. It's the same chemistry, just a few centuries earlier. Of course, not every place had ponds or rivers. Sometimes, the only source was above your head. Rainwater collection was a centuries-old skill. In desert mesas, the Pueblo carved rock basins to catch rain and direct it into underground cisterns shaded from the sun. On the plains, hides were stretched between stakes to form makeshift funnels. When the rain came, it poured directly into jars waiting below. Tree leaves acted like gutters, channeling droplets down trunks. Some tribes positioned pots at the base of wide trees like cottonwoods, knowing their bark guided rainwater efficiently. Rain didn't just fall, it was harvested. The people turned their camps into giant collection systems every time the sky opened up. They'd scrub their hides clean beforehand to avoid dirt and bird droppings, ensuring the first few minutes of rainfall washed everything before collection began. It was a ritual and a science combined. And once captured, rainwater was stored in earthen vessels, sometimes buried halfway underground to keep it cool. The water could last for weeks, clear, sweet, and untouched by mud. When skies stayed cruelly clear, tribes turned to something even gentler than rain: dew. Before sunrise, the land exhaled moisture. Grass, leaves, and even stones glistened with tiny drops of water. It wasn't much, but it was life. Women and children would walk through the early light, dragging woven blankets, animal furs, or bundles of long grass across the fields. Every surface caught dew. When the cloths were soaked, they wrung them out into containers. In dry areas like the Great Basin, some built dew racks, wooden frames covered in hide, tilted toward collection bowls. Overnight, condensation formed, and by morning, a surprising cupful of water waited. It wasn't glamorous, but it could mean the difference between living and dying. Now imagine being stranded where there's no mud, no rain, no dew, just air that feels like a furnace. The Apache and Pima of the Southwest faced that constantly. Their solution was something modern survivalists still teach today: the condensation trap. They'd dig a pit in the ground, line it with green vegetation or damp soil, and place a bowl in the center. Then, they'd stretch a hide or broadleaf across the top and weigh it down in the middle with a stone. As sunlight heated the pit, moisture from the plants and air evaporated, condensed on the cover, and dripped into the bowl. It was slow. An hour might yield only a handful of sips, but it worked. The earth itself became a distiller, turning humidity into liquid. Some tribes even used this technique with hot coals, adding warmth to accelerate evaporation. Science today calls it solar distillation. They called it survival. If you were traveling across the plains or deserts, the biggest skill wasn't filtering. It was finding water where none was visible. Animals were the best scouts. Ants and bees meant moisture nearby. Birds, especially doves, flew low and straight when heading to water. Even mosquitoes hinted at hidden pools. Tribes read these signs instinctively. Vegetation told its own story. Cottonwoods, cattails, and willows never grew without roots near groundwater. Digging nearby almost always produced seepage within a few feet. Plains hunters often carried digging sticks for exactly this reason. In dry riverbeds, tribes dug seep wells. The sand was like a giant filter, cleaning the water as it rose. The key was patience. Let the hole rest so sediment could settle, then scoop the clear top layer. And when water wasn't visible at all, they trusted their ears. In the stillness of dawn, a trained ear could hear running water miles away, echoing faintly through canyons or underground channels. Some of the cleverest techniques came from plants themselves. In the deserts, survival often meant knowing your cactus. The barrel cactus and prickly pear stored gallons of drinkable moisture inside their pulp. But the trick was knowing how to prepare it. Cut off the outer layer, crush the inside, and strain it through cloth or fiber. Raw cactus juice could be toxic if done wrong. Done right, it was salvation. Agave roots, aloe, and certain yucca plants were also rich in fluid. Travelers carried short knives specifically for slicing roots and squeezing them for sap. The result was bitter but hydrating. In forested lands, maple and birch trees provided natural sap during spring. By cutting small notches and inserting hollow reeds, tribes collected clear liquid that was safe to drink and slightly sweet. It wasn't just hydration, it was energy. Even moss held secrets. Sphagnum moss in northern forests absorbed rainwater like a sponge and acted as a mild antiseptic. Pressing it gently could yield clean droplets fit to drink. Hunters often carried chunks of it for emergencies. Even leafy trees offered help. By tying animal bladders or cloth bags around fresh green branches, they captured the moisture that plants released overnight through transpiration. In the morning, the inside of the bag held several ounces of clean condensation, small but life-saving. In the far north, tribes like the Inuit, Cree, and Athabascan faced the opposite problem: too much frozen water. They learned which ice was safe. Sea ice was salty and deadly. River ice was pure. The bluer and denser the ice, the cleaner the melt. They cut blocks, stored them in sealskin bags, and melted them slowly by firelight. Rushing the process made the water taste smoky or metallic. Slow melting produced clarity. Fresh snow was gathered carefully, only from untouched drifts far from animal tracks. It was packed into clay pots and warmed by fire-heated stones. The first meltwater was poured out, taking dust and impurities with it. What remained was pristine. Some hunters even used hollow bird bones as straws to sip from liquid layers under the ice without breaking through. They could hydrate silently while hunting seals or waiting out storms. Once water was collected, whether from plants, air, snow, or soil, the battle wasn't over. It had to be kept safe. Boiling was universal. Without metal pots, they heated rocks in fire until glowing, then dropped them into water stored in hides or baskets. Steam hissed, bubbles rose, and in minutes the water was sterilized. Each new batch of stones was rinsed, first to avoid adding ash or dirt. It was a delicate art. Too many rocks and you'd scorch the container. Too few and bacteria survived. Where fuel was scarce, tribes relied on sunlight. Clear animal bladders or thin gourds were filled and left for hours in direct sun. The ultraviolet rays killed most pathogens. They didn't know the science, but they trusted the results. If water sat in the sun and didn't spoil by nightfall, it was good. Some even noticed that leaving water in copper or silver containers kept it cleaner. Silver jewelry dropped into pots acted as a primitive antimicrobial, centuries before anyone discovered why. Metal ions interfere with bacterial growth. It wasn't luck, it was empirical science. Water wasn't just collected, it was protected. Clay pots were sealed with animal fat, beeswax, or pine resin to prevent evaporation. In desert camps, vessels were buried halfway in the ground, keeping them cool and shaded. Some tribes built stone shelters over their water stores, primitive fridges that kept liquid safe from both heat and animals. There were even portable options. Hunters carried small pouches made from animal stomachs or bladders, cleaned, dried, and rubbed with resin. These containers were flexible, watertight, and reusable for years. When filled with clean water and sealed, they could last an entire journey without spoiling. Modern researchers have since confirmed the brilliance behind these methods. Clay naturally binds fine particles through electrostatic attraction. Sand filters remove up to 99% of suspended solids. Charcoal adsorbs organic compounds and neutralizes smells. Sunlight's ultraviolet rays destroy microbes. Even dew collection works, because air can hold only so much moisture before it condenses at dawn. These weren't lucky guesses. They were laws of nature discovered through centuries of observation. When settlers arrived, they brought barrels, buckets, and European assumptions. They scoffed at the idea of scooping muddy water into pits or waiting hours for it to clear. Then they got sick: dysentery, cholera, dehydration. The people they dismissed as primitive had already solved the problem centuries earlier. The irony is perfect. The settlers chased gold. The real treasure was water. And the key to finding it was humility, the willingness to learn from those who had lived with the land, not against it. For many Native American nations, water wasn't just a resource. It was a living relative. The Lakota call it Mniwichoni, meaning water is life, a phrase that carries both physical and spiritual truth. Among the Hopi and Pueblo peoples, rain was seen as a divine gift rather than a weather event. Entire ceremonies were dedicated to calling it forth, with intricate dances performed by masked Kachina spirits, believed to carry prayers to the clouds. The Zuni and Hopi rain dances weren't random celebrations. They followed precise cycles tied to planting seasons and moon phases, performed to maintain harmony between earth, sky, and people. The Cherokee held green corn ceremonies that included offerings of water to cleanse the spirit and invite renewal. Across tribes, rivers and springs were viewed as the veins of Mother Earth, flowing with her lifeblood. To pollute or waste water was not only disrespectful, it was a spiritual wound. Every drop was sacred, every rainfall a blessing, and every act of drinking or bathing began with quiet gratitude to the spirits that sustained life. Water connected the human world to the divine, a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. When rain finally fell after long droughts, it wasn't just weather. It was an answered prayer. Every drop of clean water you drink today owes something to that ancient knowledge. Sedimentation, filtration, disinfection, storage, all of it began with people watching nature and paying attention. They didn't just survive, they mastered ecosystems that would kill most modern travelers in days. They read clouds, tracked insects, tapped trees, and pulled life out of mud. Their methods were sustainable, renewable, and perfectly adapted to their world. And maybe that's the part we forget. The goal wasn't comfort, it was balance. They didn't just take from the earth, they listened to it. It's easy to look back and see just mud, dirt, and desperation. But what you're really seeing is intelligence in its purest form, the transformation of something worthless into something vital. Mud into water. Water into life. Each droplet filtered, caught, or coaxed from the earth carried more than hydration. It carried memory. Proof that science doesn't have to wear a lab coat or speak Latin. Sometimes it just needs a pot of clay, a handful of sand, a cactus knife, and the patience to let the earth do its magic. It saved lives, it sustained civilizations, and it still whispers a simple truth. Clean water has always been the greatest treasure, and the cleverest minds were the ones who learned to find it where no one else looked.